keeping open minds. Bless the technology that it will work properly. Most of all, help us to hear your voice. We welcome you, Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. Good morning, Third Street Church of God Sunday School. Where Dr. Alan Coswell is our Minister of Christian Education. I am the superintendent of the Sunday school, and Reverend Dr. Cheryl J. Sanders is our senior pastor. And I'd like to welcome our students, saints, friends. Welcome to our, what we call our community gathering. We have a very special guest speaker with us today. New York State James Sanders Jr., who I am so proud to say that he is my biological brother and friend. We were both raised by the same mom and dad in Queens, New York. Senator Sanders will speak to us about why reparations for African Americans are necessary to further justice and fairness in America. Now, before I turn this meeting over into his hands, here are just a few Zoom, what I call Zoom rules to consider. Number one, make sure your mics are muted when you're not talking. Number two, don't forget to unmute when you begin to speak. And number three, you are welcome to put your questions or comments in the chat as we are going along. I will do my best to manage the chat as we go along. And the last rule, raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. With that, I now also speak very clearly into your mic when you are speaking. So without further ado, I present to you Senator James Sanders Jr.
Good morning all. I trust that you can hear me well.
Yes.
All right. Then I won't yell at you. I believe that we've been prayed for, so I believe that we will start with, you should know a little something about the person that you're dealing with. And I should tell you that I really enjoy questions. Don't give me the easy ones. Give me the toughest questions that you have. I mean, the stuff that you really wakes you up in the middle of the night and says how or what or why. And if they're really difficult, I will give them to the superintendent, Shirley DeCarty. If they're easy and make you look good, I would take them for myself. I assure you. No, I really enjoy the process of conversation. And today we're going to have a conversation, one rooted in the Bible, and I'll go into that. But first, a little bit about me. I am the proud brother of your superintendent, and I have learned much from her. I used to sneak and read her books when she would bring them back from school. I'm not telling all the books, young lady, don't worry about it. So I would read her books, and I was always one who wanted to read. I was born in the projects themselves, in housing development. I was born in the Rockaways, in a housing development known as the Hamels Houses. I was not born in a hospital, mind you. I was born in the Hamels Houses, literally. No midwife, just my mother and I. So I was not spanked by any man. My mother made up for it, but one story at a time. To understand me, you really have to understand a couple of things. First, that I was raised COG, Church of God, my friends, Church of God. If you don't get that, then you'll never get me. You've lost it. So And until 16, I was going to go into the ministry, my friends. I was going to go into the ministry. I have won awards for knowing the Bible. All I can say is God is not finished with me. I start with a joke. Now, never, never, never say this to any political, and you'll understand. What do they call a failed preacher? A politician. Do not say that to politicians. You will lose a vote. All right. I should remember that where I am. So I raised in Church of God. My earliest memories are running around the first Church of God in Far Rockaway, Queens, where at the time the pastor was Pastor Cray, and learning how to play tag in the church. And I mean, all of the PK kids stuff that you will think of. Among my peers are Bishop Timothy Clark, who used to run under the benches with me as we would play tag and do all kinds of stuff until we learned what was the purpose of church. What else can I tell you that you may find useful to know? Another thing that you'll find useful is I, of course, was a Boy Scout, thanks to the Church of God. And assistant senior patrol leader. Hey, Brother Finberg, I got it. I'm reading it wrong. Yes, I did that. And 10 Mile River is 3 Mile River. I'm sorry, is where we went to camp. What else? This led me. Where else do you send a guy, a young man who believes he's tough and rough and all the rest? The Marine Corps. Of course, I went into the Marine Corps. And young, impressionable, think he's tough. Where else? The infantry of the Marine, the real Marines. Lord have mercy. God certainly looked over his foolish son and led me through that and brought me back. I studied history and journalism. I would have a double major, but you can only do one at the time in City University of New York. So I took history. I specialized in American history. What I'm really noted for is American history after the Civil War, especially what happened to the African American people, what happened to this noble people. So all right, I've done just about everything. I have done construction. I mean, I work with young people for 10, 15 years. I've done a little bit of everything. And I have been led to becoming a New York State Senator. In fact, I have a lot of titles, a lot of hats. I'll give you a couple of them. I am chair of banking for New York State. I am, I'm on every economic committee there is that New York State has. Insurance, small business, et cetera, et cetera. I'm on the Homeland Services and Veterans Committee. I am, I also have the distinction of being the author of the New York State's reparations bills. I'll get to that soon enough. So I worked my way up. I was the president of my school board, which is the most thankless job in America. No matter what you do, half the people are mad at you. It does not matter. If you give them gold, they'll say, are you trying to buy us? And if you are, why did you give us platinum? I mean, no matter what you do, you'll never, it's the most thankless, unpaid, thankless job, harder than a senator, harder than anything I'm doing now. All right, I stayed that. I was the president for 10 years. Um, I used to work for Congressman Flake, who was also Reverend Dr. Flake, who led arguably the biggest mega church in New York City at the time. He had around 20,000 members or something of that nature. But I never went there. It was Allen AME, very good church, I'm sure. Very good church, great place. Something about COG kind of gets to you, and you kind of like your gospel straight from the Bible. Which brings me back here. All right. No editorial. What else can I tell you I've done? 10 years, 12 years as the city council. I was the first Black guy to chair economic development in New York City since its inception, 250 years or whatever. I worked with Mayor Bloomberg at the time. Very interesting guy, very interesting. I've lived a very blessed life. I'm the most blessed man you will probably ever meet. Very blessed. Undeserving. Grace and mercy is real, my friends. Undeserving. I don't deserve these things. The only thing that I could say why it happens is because I tell everybody where it came from. I tell everybody I'm blessed. The world doesn't understand what that means. That blessing had to be blessed means empowered to succeed. That I've been given something and told to do some things. All right, let's see. I'm going to take you to the Bible on the way to reparations, because that's what we're here to speak about today. I think that we should start with the Bible, and I thank the superintendent for giving all kinds of scriptures, which I actually have. I mean, I was tempted just to take credit for it completely since I am a political, but something about Sunday and cheating my sister doesn't go well. So many of these came from her. And she draws your attention in terms of the Bible to Leviticus, 6th chapter, 4th through the 5th verse. I'm just going to give you the verses. I'm not going to read it today, but she had drawn attention to Leviticus. Then, of course, she draws attention to Numbers, the 5th chapter, 6th through 7th verse. And Corinthians, 2nd Corinthians, I should say, 13th chapter and the 11th verse. Ooh, she really put it together here. Exodus, 12th chapter, 35th and the 36th verse. I'll repeat this again. Ezra, 6th chapter, 1st through 12th verse. Let's start again. Leviticus 6, 4th through the 5th verse. Numbers 5th, 6th through the 7th verse. 2nd Corinthians 13, the 11th verse. Exodus 12, 35th through the 36th verse. Ezra 6, 1st through the 12th verse. Ooh, she actually gives some more down here. Man, I tell you, for the rest, you're going to have to go to her. She has done her homework well here. So clearly the Bible is speaking to us and is saying that there is a place among humans, among the people, to repair. And the word reparations is really coming out of the word to repair, to try to make whole again. And but the Bible is not the only place that we can look to for guidance on this issue, because the UN, which my sister has kindly pointed out, also speaks to the United Nations, of course, also speaks to 5 different types of reparations. And they speak of, and I will repeat these: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Ooh, that one. Small words, man, I tell you. Restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Now, those are very interesting concepts, and we need to use all of those things. And we have to be very careful because we have a barrister here among us, a judge, as a matter of fact, Fred Carney Jr. So I'm going to have to straighten my back up and watch my speech a little bit. Otherwise, I'll have to stand in front of him, and he may not be in the most forgiving mood, but that's all right. I believe that grace and mercy will cover me today. So the reparations has an old history, and the idea of reparations for the enslaved Africans in America is a very old one. The first idea actually happened during slavery. During slavery, a woman, I believe in Boston or the environment thereof, a enslaved woman actually sued her enslaver and said that, hey, she was promised freedom and this and that. And she won in a case. And this was during slavery, mind you. So the first reparations actually took place during slavery. In 1866, at the fall of slavery, slavery in America fell in 1865. During 1866, a Black woman named Callie House, and a pastor, mind you, always the church, started a nationwide movement to create reparations. And sadly, that movement did not work. But even during the war, reparations was actually tried. General Sherman, in his famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, march to the sea in Georgia, was splitting the South in half, and they called on slaves or the enslaved to resist. And next thing you know, his army was being followed by an army of formerly enslaved. They were fighting the Confederacy by fleeing the plantations. And this caused the Southern economy to crash because they could not, no labor. But then the General Sherman had to feed and clothe these people. And he said, what do you do with all of these folks? So he came up with an idea, and he issued a field order. In fact, he first called on several preachers to meet with him, Black preachers, to meet with him, and said, what should we do with you folk? What do you want? And they said, we want to buy land. We want to farm. This is what people knew. We want to farm. We want to buy land. Give us land. We don't want anything from you. We just want the ability to do for self. So General Sherman is the one who came up with the idea of 40 acres taken from the giant plantations that the Southern insurrectionists had. They would take their land, divide them into 40 acres, and give them to the enslaved, and then lend them a mule. Mind you, the mule was alone. And lend them a mule. The army, they had crushed the Confederacy. The mules were the main transportation besides horses. They were the pack animals. So they didn't need all these mules. They were crushing the Confederacy. They would lend mules to the enslaved, formerly enslaved, and he started doing this. And it went along with by Abraham Lincoln. Now, sadly, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and his vice president, a Southerner who stayed with the Union, Andrew Johnson, but was a very small man in just about every means that you could think of. He was a very small, insecure man, and a racist to boot. He was really a bad guy. He became president, and the Southern um, aristocracy started wooing him, and they, would say how great he was, and he went along with that and gave them back their land. He took it from the enslaved and gave them back their land. Had Lincoln stayed, we might not be having this conversation. But Johnson was there, and that was an attempt. Now, America has had many, many reparations. I mean, we just did one. If you were a Marine in Camp Lejeune between many different years, you were drinking poison water, tainted water, and but you couldn't get your money because North Carolina, where Camp Lejeune is located, had very strict laws saying that you had to apply within 4 years, and most people didn't even know. So most of the people who were getting cancer and all kinds of stuff were ineligible. Congress just passed a law saying that we get rid of those time limits and we allow any damaged person to get reparations, to be remediated, to be made whole in terms of money and health. That's the latest form of reparations. There are thousands of reparations that go on every day in America. We just don't understand it as such. I can point you to the largest ones, of course. The ones that quickly jump to mind are the reparations that was given to the Japanese Americans for their internship. When World War II was happening, many people felt that Japanese Americans would favor Japan, and they interned they put them in concentration camps. They interned them. Now, it's interesting that they did not do that to Italian Americans, mind you. That Italy was an enemy of America, but well, there I go thinking. But after the war and the Allies won, around 25 years ago, the Japanese were given reparations for their losses during this period, and an apology, mind you. And Ronald Reagan gave that one. The great communicator. He was no friend. Well, I'll be kind to Ronald Reagan. But they're not the only ones. The Armenians in Armenia was an area in the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, and there was great massacres against those people. The Armenians in the U.S. sued the Turkish government in Los Angeles, and they won. And they won some reparations. We could go on. There are many instances. Of course, the largest one that the world knows of is the Jewish reparations that they received from basically Germany and other places at the end of World War II. And of course, we do know that the Nazis, one of the most sick and satanic inspired ideas, fascism, they did horrible things to Jews and others. Mind you, they're not just the Jews. 6 million of them, but another 12 million Russians actually were killed by the fascists. But the Jews got reparations, or the European Jews received reparations for the damages and theft that they received from the the German people primarily. Other countries are giving some reparations also, but it's primarily Germany. Now, here's an important point. Only 11% of the German people agreed to reparations at the end of, during the end of World War II. Only 11%. Now it is up to 95% agree. So when a person tells me, well, the bulk of the American people don't believe in this, I hear you. But I will remind them only 11% of the German people agreed, and far more than that of Americans agreed. And we, even when you do polls with just simply white Americans, far more. It's close. The lowest polls that I've seen were around 20%. So even then, you're doing better than they were in Germany. But now the German reparations is so widespread and so well understood that no one argues. Let's see. So that's some of the background of reparations, the idea of trying to make a group whole. Now, this idea has always been in the community, in the Black community primarily, but it has gone mainstream for many different reasons. And among the reasons, the killing of George Floyd led to an awakening with many people. And they were saying that, what have we done and what are we doing with this group? And it allowed people to start thinking anew of this. And reparations has taken on a life of its own. Now, the first state to come up with a commission to study reparations was not New York, sadly, but California. California, the left coast. So California created a commission to study the idea of reparations, and they did a 2-year study. And that study has resulted in 2 basic documents. And I will send 3 documents. I will send 2 of them to Ms. Carney, and that way she can get to whoever wishes. One was a 500-page pre-document. Then there was the report itself of 1,100 pages. But Ms. Carney, why don't you, I don't want to say cheat, but I will say read the executive summary. It's 74 pages. And I know Brother Carswell wants to read the entire 1,100 pages, but give him the executive summary also, that way he'll have time for his great mission. So California went first, but they became bogged down, my friends. And I will, we'll tell no lies up here. They lost control of their narrative. The right-wing press started grabbing the most exotic figures and prodding them to say the most, I would argue, ridiculous stuff. And they were prodded they would get people dressed in their idea of African attire and prod them to say all kinds of stuff. Some of it, we would say, bordering on bigotry, and they would come up with some stuff. California came up with a budget 3 times the state's budget. Meaning, are they saying that the state will do nothing for 3 years except pay this? Are they saying that that you just couldn't do it, and any politician that signed on that would probably lose their job? The governor has not said anything. The governor over there has not said anything about this so far. They are having difficulties. Some people on the inside told me they're having difficulties winning over the Democrats, less long the Republicans. So California, we may not want their example. San Francisco was doing a study too, and they came up with a figure of $5 million for every Black person. Uh, um, uh, hey, I want to move to San Francisco is all I can say. But it's I would argue that it's not doable because you have to understand that there is a difference between federal reparations and state reparations. State reparations has to be based on the budget of the state. And it must look at who was damaged in that state. So I was jokingly saying I moved to California, but I would be ineligible because I was not a citizen of California, as said. State reparations versus federal. Now think of now when Fred Carney pays his income tax, as he always does, above time, doesn't even wait for the day, he pays it and doesn't even wait. And sometimes he gets a refund. Now, in most states, you can get a refund from your local because if you worked in the city or did something, you can get a refund there. But you can also get a refund from the state itself. Then you can get a refund from the federal government. So you need to think of reparations as at least three different entities, each one doing something different. And I am an expert, if you wish, at state reparations in New York State in particular. So you could get a refund or your reparations from three different entities, at least, and perhaps more. Now, New York State has been looking at this issue for quite the while. And I have carried this bill for a long time, and the political machinations, my, how the sausage is made on the political, that's a whole different conversation, worthy one, but probably never be told. But New York, the New York State Assembly voted to do a study on reparations. The state Senate voted to do a study, and this goes before the governor. It's on the governor's desk. We are hearing that in all probability, she is going to sign it. Now, I will take a moment to tell you that I was in the room when they were speaking of, and I may have to get a cord for a second. I've just been warned 20% power. So I'll run in a second and get a cord. I was in the room when my colleagues in the Democratic majority voted. Now, we have what's called a supermajority of Democrats. There are 64 senators, and we have something like 45 of them, which is never been done before. And we are, there's a supermajority in the Senate. There's a supermajority of Democrats in the Assembly, and the governor is a Democrat, meaning that you actually can do some stuff. Now, our governor is kind of a conservative Democrat, but one step at a time, my friends, one step at a time. And what makes it very interesting, for the first time ever, the head of the Senate, the president of the Senate, is a Black woman. Very powerful, smart woman, very smart. And the speaker of the Assembly is a Black man. Very interesting place to be. So when they voted for this in the Senate, And then they started speaking of something else. The gravity of this hit me. And the gravity of knowing that this was something that that should have been done 150 years ago, and with about to undo some horrible things, I started tearing up. Now I'm a Marine, and we're not noted for our crying. We usually make other people cry, but one story at a time. I started tearing up. So I did the macho, quickly, and that didn't work. So I grabbed a napkin and started doing a quick dab, and that didn't work. And I had to just surrender to it and put my head in my hands and started quietly sobbing of that we would try to make good for some people that have been done wrong for so long. The gravity of that, and that it was my bill, and that I would have a hand in that. It was unworthy as I am, yet God chose me at this moment to do these things. My colleagues were stunned. They've never seen me in this manner, but the gravity of the thing. All right, which brings me back here. So my job now is twofold. First, I got to win the governor over. Now, let's be clear. At first, she was not going to do this. Absolutely not. She saw what happened in California and saw that their governor got a new nostril torn into him on this issue, and that they made it look like a clown show over there. And she had absolutely no intention on signing this. We had to win her over, and we waged a type of political guerrilla war against her. And that war has probably been successful. Probably. In my business, it ain't over till it's over. But the second thing that I had to do is to win over colleagues, because the process says, here's what the New York State, here's what we agreed to. And if the governor signs this, and I'm believing that she's going to do it before November is up, the governor will select 3 people. The state assembly will select 3 people, and the Senate will select 3 people, and these people will form a commission. After being selected, they have to have their first meeting within 6 months. After that, they have to have a report turned in within 1 year. Now, we're going to modify some of this, my friends. We're not going to change the number of people, but that idea of turning in a report within a year is really problematic, my friends. They took 2 years in California. We're probably going to change that to 18 months, and some other minor things. Now, I am going to, Charlena, would you mind taking over and go through some of the Bible things? I got to get my cable, my cord, so that I don't leave on you guys. I need a minute, literally.
All right. Okay. So while he's going to get his cord to charge up his computer, I am going to ask that you put your questions into the chat. That you start typing in your questions, and I will manage it. And so when he comes back and he's finished with his lecture, then we will be able to engage in questions. I know you have questions about this very profound commission that he is going to be a part of. I think he's going to be a part of creating. So I'm going to just ask that you start typing in your questions into the chat. And when he comes back, we will be able to take a look at some of your questions. And I believe he's charging it up. And I do have several Bible references that regarding reparations that I will be happy to share with anyone who would like to have those references. Please just let me know in the chat and I will send it to you. All right, Senator, are you ready?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. There are many arguments. If you guys don't raise a question, then I will argue it. An educated person is supposed to argue both sides or be able to argue both sides. And I will deal with your question first, but I will, if need be, I will argue against reparations. I think that we should have an open conversation. We should have a beautiful one. So let's see. So the Senate is I am hard at work on a lot of different phases. Now, another group that I have to win over, my friends, are my white colleagues in the white community. They deserve to weigh in. They absolutely deserve to have their questions addressed, and we will attempt to address them. Charlene, may I also remind you of a video that I did with Marsha on TV when I was interviewed on TV. You may make that available to these people, and that way they could get more of an understanding of that. So I'm going to start. I'm a politician. I can talk forever, my friends. I could talk of a glass of water for 2 days if you wish. So you do save yourself, ask questions, save yourself, or else I have you.
Senator Sanders, we do have some questions coming in. And the very first question from Dr. Allen, if reparations are based on slavery and New York was not a slave state, what would New York-based reparations be based on?
Not only was New York a slave state, New York outlawed slavery in 1821, but you had New York's been around for a long time. It started by the Dutch in the 1600s, so you had at least 200 years of slavery. New York not only was a slave state, New York, slavery, as we understand it, could not have existed without New York. New York was where the houses of insurance were. They insured the slaves. New York is where the merchants were. They bought the goods of the South and traded. New York is where the banks were. The banks put the money up for slavery and took all of the remittances. New York built some of the ships that transported the slaves. New York took the cotton and sold it to Europe and tobacco and all kinds of stuff. New York was the hub. At a certain period, New York was the largest area of slavery. New York has a hidden history, or not even hidden. We're not taught history well, my friends. And I would argue that's not a mistake. We are miseducated, especially when it comes to Blacks. So New York has such a role with slavery. It should have been the first state to declare a study. Not California. California was not a slave state, although they had slavery in California. They're not supposed to, but people brought their slaves, and there was slavery in California. Nowhere near as widespread as New York. So New York is up to its neck in slavery. When you hear Wall Street, that was built by the slaves. They built a wall trying to protect the colonists tried to protect themselves from the Native Americans. They built a wall, which now known as Wall Street. They also fiendishly emancipated. They took all of the free slaves, if you wish, and gave them land right outside the wall. So that if the Native Americans attacked, they would attack them first. What a system. All right. Your next question.
I have another question, and this question is coming from Judge Carney.
Oh,
Senator,
my.
will you please expound on the specific ways that the state of New York is liable to former slaves and their descendants?
Okay.
And
Now,
he answered that when he answered
Yes.
Brother Coswell's question.
All right.
well, that does allow me to expand it and say we're not simply looking at slavery. We are looking at the post-slave period, the American apartheid period, which we know as Jim Crow, from 1865 to 1965. And we're looking at things to this day, the redlining, the access to capital or denial of capital, the building of roads through communities, the poor health, the poor education. We're looking at all of these things. We're not simply looking at slavery. We're looking at slavery and its aftermaths.
All right. I have another question, and this question, let me just remind everyone that you can raise your hand, and you could also put your question in the chat. But this question is coming from myself. Why do opponents of slavery, what do they say? What does the opponents of slavery say about reparations?
Oh my, there are some really very good arguments against reparations. And the best argument is when people say, hey, wait a minute. My people were not here during slavery. My people just came over in 1950 or whatever year. We did not participate in that. Why should I pay? Now, the answer to that is as simple as where you walk. We say to them, my friends, the roads that you walked on were literally made by someone. And if you get to the beginning, the roads, the bridges, the docks and the piers, those hospitals, everything, you have benefited from slavery. You may not have been directly with a whip in your hand, but you have benefited. The amount of the loans that you were able to get, which were denied to other people, that was a benefit to you. All of these things that come with America, you can't just cherry pick history. You can't say, I'm American here, but not here. It is a joint project. And once we claim to be Americans, we got to take the whole thing. All of that becomes our joint history. And even though we're not the one running around with a whip or running around with some white hood on, to my knowledge, you benefited from this. There were land grants that were given to white populations after slavery, and they did well. That blacks were denied. There was a GI Bill, which many whites after slavery were able to take advantage of, and was denied often to black veterans. In New York, again, there's a famous Levittown, the first suburbia was built, and they did not allow any blacks in. So even if you came after the Civil War, you benefited greatly from America and its wealth. And this wealth, to a large degree, was created by the theft of people's labor, in most cases black. So another argument but I'll stop there. There are some very decent arguments that we have to confront.
I have another question coming from Brother Fenberg. Given the budget challenges California's commission faced, how do you propose addressing the monetary issues for New York?
Now that one is the billion-dollar question, sir. And the answer is we'll address it quietly. That one, I'm already on to the next level here, sir. I am amassing some of the greatest minds that this nation has. I have gone out to all parts of this nation trying to bring in some of the smartest people around to say, what does reparations looks like? First, you got to know what it is you're building. Then you can try to figure out how to fund it, sir. So the first question is, what is a game changer? We have to keep it in mind what we're trying to do in the business world. It's called outcome-based performance. You start with the goal in mind and you work backwards. What are we trying to do? We're trying to create a game changer. We're trying to make sure that in New York State, we don't have this conversation again. We're trying to figure out a way of making America for everyone in New York State. We're trying to make sure that there's an even playing field, no more and no less, and even equality of opportunity. That's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to do it in terms of health. We're trying to do it in terms of wealth. We're trying to do it in several different ways. Now, once you figure out what you're trying to do, then you have to look at, is it policy that needs to be changed? Is it laws that need to be changed? Must we move money to do these things? I would argue and say there's going to be some combination of all three. But it is not, this is my personal view, it will not be just a check handed to a person, where that universally is not, it doesn't poll well with any group to just hand a check to people. And if you raise a question later, we can talk about what does it look like more. But where does the money come from? New York State has a budget of $229 billion a year. And that budget is larger than most of the countries of the world. And there are ways of, will it be a bond that is put forward? It may be. Will it be moving or saying that taxes, the tax structure will be changed, and instead of this group paying taxes, they won't pay taxes for a period? It may be. It may be many different things, sir, but I'm gathering the best minds now where we are starting to look at it that will have the least impact on the people of New York and the and yet be a game changer. But you start with the even the most important question. That's a good one, sir. But the most important question is, what are you trying to do? Then you can work back from there. And that one, you asked $1 million question, but that what are you trying to do is the $1 billion question. But I'll stop and see if there's another.
I would like to know, Senator, if you know anything about Oklahoma and the riot that occurred, the attack on the community. I believe it was their Wall Street, and as it relates to reparations, could you shed a little light on that?
Gladly. The Black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was in what's called the Greenwood section, was one of the wealthiest Black communities in the U.S. There were several, mind you. There was Rosewood down in California, I'm sorry, Florida, etc. There were many of these different communities. This was basically becoming a self-sufficient community. They were able to do for themselves. They had their own lawyers and bankers and this and that, and they were really the envy of the nation. Their business community was so doing so well, it became known as the Black Wall Street. Now, this led, unfortunately, to a lot of jealousy and hatred of these people. They, for whatever reason, hate is something that we've had to wrestle with since the beginning of humankind. So, in 1921, a elevator operator at the time. There was elevators. And an elevator operator, black elevator operator, is supposed to, in a crowded elevator, have bumped into a white woman. This took on a life of its own, and he was accused of rape, and he was brought to jail, and a white mob was inflamed by the local newspapers and others, and they ran down to a mob of they say 300 ran down to the courthouse because they were going to take him out and lynch him, and as usual. But they were met by a group of Black war veterans known as the African Blood Brotherhood, and which was a national organization, mind you. And these blacks were armed, and they said, no, we're not going to lynch this guy. He deserves a fair trial. He's going to have a fair trial. And the racist mob just could not believe that blacks would stand up to them. And one of them tried to take a weapon out of the hands of these veterans, and he found himself on the wrong side of a gun. Not a good place. He was shot. And a battle began. It was the mobs encircled the Black community, but the African Blood Brotherhood and others protected it so well they could not enter. So what they did was they went back to the police, and the police deputized them. The mob now became policemen, and they brought in all kinds of sheriffs and policemen and gave these guys weapons. And they flew planes over Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they lit dynamite and dropped it on Black Wall Street. And this was the first use of planes in aerial bombardment in world history. And it was done against the Black community there. And in the face of airplanes dropping bombs, which never happened before, it would be like, I don't know, some new weapon coming and hitting us that we were not ready for. And the face of all of these mobs, well armed, the Black defenders they could not hold, and the racist mob rampage through Tulsa, killing, raping, murdering, butchering, burning, and drove out the population, and stole their land, which was what they're really, and property and everything else that they had. They just took it and went into these homes and said, I am now it's mine. And the Blacks were left with nothing. This is a common refrain. There are many stories like this. This is one of the most well-known. There are very good books on this. One is called the Sundown Towns, towns where Blacks knew that when that sun went down, you better not be here. And there are hundreds of those towns. In fact, there's one in Lackawanna, New York, was a sundown town. And as somebody's trying to reach me, let me just tell him something. Okay, so there are sundown towns, and this happened all over the place. This type of attacks. This is one of the reasons why we lost our wealth. We just could not. The law did not allow, there was no law for us. The law was, you're going to lose.
All right, I have some more questions that has come in. Professor Terry Montague asked this question: does the passage of this bill pose risk that other groups come forward seeking reparations as well? How would you respond to such a challenge?
Everything you do in life is a risk. To do nothing is a risk. So under those conditions, America does need to sit up and look and get its house in order. If there was wrong done to people, then we need to make it right. America is an idea. It's not, it's an attempt to make the perfect union. It is not done. We all have to play a role. And if you say to a person, if I was to say to you, yes, I did not pay your father and his grandfather for a job. Imagine I had a construction company and I didn't pay them, and you're coming to me with back pay. And I said, well, if I pay your father, give your father his back pay, the next guy will come to me looking for back pay. That's not a legal argument. I can't take that and say, well, yes, I did wrong, but if I pay one, I got to pay the other. That's not a legal argument. And a court, if we went to Judge Carney's court and I said, yes, it's proved that I've done wrong, but if I pay one, I have to pay the other. And yes, I have the money to pay, but hey, if I pay one, I got to pay the other. So I don't want to pay. It would not be a argument that would pass muster in a fair court. I suspect that the judge wants to weigh in on that. I named him, so I put him into it. That opens the door.
Judge Carney?
You're muted.
Basically, you're saying that if I let you black people use my swimming pool, all my white customers will leave. But and that is the risk involved. But what I would like to open up a question to the entire church, all the people who are participating on this call. And in Sunday school, our teacher, Sister Claretta, taught us a story about Apostle Paul and Barnabas and how they went to the Greek and Roman churches in Antioch and other churches and asked them to send money to the poor churches in Jerusalem and Palestine. Y'all hearing a lot about Palestine lately, because of what happened to them during the Roman occupation of Jerusalem. As a church, what role do we play in correcting the inequalities and the financial disadvantages of our people in today's world as people of the church? Now, the Apostle Paul went around and asked, like I said, the churches that had money to send money, and some of it he took himself. What is our role today?
That question is for anyone. You can certainly raise your hand and answer it, or you can write your answer in. So while we're giving people a chance maybe to think about that, just to think about it, I have another question that has just come in. But we need to think about that question, Judge Carney. I think it's a very good one, something that we need to, that's definitely critical thinking and it would take time. Sometimes people have to think about that. But I have a question from Deborah Hardy, and this is her question. If New York reparations is successful, would reparations include former New Yorkers?
Well, I'm going to widen that question. At the beginning of this conversation, we were speaking of California, and I jokingly said that if San Francisco has said that they want to give, their commission has said that they want to come up with up to $5 million per Black person. Now that may sound big, but there's only a handful of Blacks in San Francisco. So, but I was jokingly saying, I'm going to move to San Francisco. There's always a cutoff point, my friend. There's always a cutoff point. Let me make a hard question against reparations and then answer your question in one sense. Sanders, if you are successful, what's to stop every white, Asian, Latino, and only God knows what else from saying that they are Black and they are eligible for reparations? Okay. Well, there's three things. The first thing is we'll have a cutoff date. You have to be in New York by a certain time, etc., whatever the dates are. The second is that we will use DNA. You know, we have new science. We can basically say what percentage of what you have, and we will decide what is the right amount in terms of DNA. We'll let scientists and medical ethicists figure that. But I get a kick out of this one. But the third thing we will use is the census. Every 10 years, you get a chance to write down and say what you are. If you say, and we'll use a census saying that we'll look back on 12 years. 12 years ago, you had to be Black. If you were not Black 12 years ago and suddenly become Black now, you are not Black, you are not eligible. So everybody who's passing, everybody who's doing whatever, you have taken yourself out of this picture. And everybody who, you know, I don't want to be Black, okay, continue. Not a problem, continue. But don't come for this money. All right, your next question.
I have a question to Judge Carney's question.
Uh-oh.
All right, remember I said it's
Family Feud.
Thinking, and we had to really, some people have to really think about this. And this is coming from the First Church in New York City. And they say the churches should write letters, contact their elected officials, and elect their members. Their members should become politically involved.
Well, the church, of course, must play a role. The church has played a role in slavery. The church has played a role. There's no way that the church will not have a role here. Not to take an action is an action. It's usually to side on the side of the oppressors. If we're walking down the street and we see a person beating up a child, and we say we don't get involved, we sided on the side of the oppressor. The church must be the intercession. The church must be that light on the hill that's beckoning folk, to saying this is a way, this is God's way. The church had a role in slavery. In the beginning, it was very negative. But as time went on, more and more and more churches stood up against slavery. The Quakers, I mean, there's some churches that have had an amazing position, but even they started out bad. The church by and large, we had a terrible role on slavery. But as time went on, the church did, and the same is true in the civil rights struggle. Many churches did not back Martin Luther King. Church of God was one of them. Did not back Martin Luther King. We did not play a role in that. By not playing a role, we sided with the oppressors. Now, our teaching at the time was telling us that this was a world of men and people, and we leave that, and God will resolve these things, and we'll just do our Father's work. But I would argue that we misunderstood what God said. The book of Luke, the 4th chapter, speaks that our part of our job is to free the slaves. And that does not simply mean freeing them from drug addiction. That means freeing them from all kinds of oppressions. Well, there I go thinking again.
I just want to say that one person here in the chat is saying the church mission is to educate their members, which is what we're doing here. But I have Judge Carney, your hand was up, and then I have another question that just came in.
Well, in answer to my own question, would it be expedient for us as a denomination, the Church of God, the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church, to look back and examine the inequities within our own denominations between the predominantly Black congregations and the predominantly white congregations historically? Don't you think that's something we should do?
It is happening more and more. It will happen as America deals with its original sin, slavery. It is dealing with these issues. The church is no exception. The church, I would argue, is in a better place because we have the word, and the word is clear on this issue. The word speaks to reparations, and from the book of Exodus, every time you hear of the Hebrews leaving Egypt, they did not leave empty-handed. They were showered with gifts from the Egyptians at the time. So they were given a type of reparations. The Bible is clear. Are we clear about the Bible is a different story. And we should take every part. I've always felt that I'm more a believer in what's called liberation theology, that it is more of an active thing. It's not just a Sunday morning thing. It is church begins after service, and church is how we live our lives. Church is what we do, or the gospel rather, not church, but the gospel is what we do, we practice. And the gospel insists that we lead struggle for better, for greater, to help make people whole, to help declare the acceptable year of the Lord.
All right. We have Dr. Coswell is asking this question again, and he says, are reparations solely a matter of paying victims money, or are there additional ways to achieve this? Policies, for instance.
There are hundreds of ways to achieve this. California, of course, their reparations commission turned in 1,100 pages of suggestions. I believe that they made 100 suggestions, and they are all different types. Some will require money. Some will require a change of law. Some will require policy and other things. I will make sure that you have the executive summary, but we are limited by our vision of how to go about this. This is why we now need to start thinking what does reparations mean? These words are nice, but what does it mean to be made whole? Is it land?
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Another question from our Sunday school teacher, Claretta McDaniels. Was Alan's question asked and answered?
No, that was you just asked Alan's question.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I have another question from Marcus Snipes. Churches should provide more information about how the people, members, can support the agenda, especially of those who are also members and or are in positions to make change in either policy or law. It sounds like a statement rather than a question.
Well, I agree with that, but I will remind everyone that the church is you, that wherever two or three are gathered is the church. And under those conditions, it starts with us educating ourselves first, which you're doing a great job. I commend you. Your church in the Third Street Church is, as usual, way ahead of the loop of everybody, which is where you're supposed to be. So the first thing we do is educate ourselves. Then it's a question of educating the people around the church and going outward. And yes, ultimately, you'll have to call all of your politicians and you'll have to say, excuse me, where do you stand on this issue? And then once they give you the gobbledygook that they're going to give you, then you need to press them further and say, okay, what are you doing about this? And that is where the rubber meets the road.
I have a Senator, I have another question. Is there an organization pursuing federal reparations that we should be aware and can support?
Yes, there are several federal organizations pursuing reparations. Now, I will take the liberty of sending Ms. Carney a list of 2 or 3 of these. And it gets interesting at that point because there's arguments in the world of reparation. The main argument is who should get reparations. All right. Now, we spoke of blacks. Okay, we can prove who's black and who's not. But the two arguments have to do with what is called lineage versus harm-based. All right. One group of thought says that only people who can show that their people were enslaved in the U.S. by the U.S. should get U.S.-based reparations. And I give an example of this. My immediate family, we have traced our roots back to around 1820. So we can prove that we were in the U.S. and we'll trace it even better. And we traced that around 30 years ago, more. So by now, we probably can trace our roots back to the 1700s. So I'm encouraging everybody, time you trace your roots, my friends. There's two major organizations that do it. I don't work for either one. I'm not getting a check from either one. I ran my DNA 2 different ways. I ran my DNA through the larger white organization is called 23andMe, 23andMe, and it gave me a lot of good information. And it said that I was 23andMe. The second organization that I ran my DNA with, is a black firm called African Ancestry. Now, they have the largest data bank on Africa. You really need both if you wish. And 23andMe told me what part of Africa that I came from. I'm sorry, 23andMe spoke of Africa, African ancestry, let me know that I was 54% Igbo, Nigerian, if you wish. And I could tell you stories about that, but one story at a time. So I would encourage people to run their DNA both ways and to start putting your papers in order. Start getting your family tree down packed. Now, here's the negative side of running your DNA. Here's the negative side. I've heard that they're doing a little bit better. Those companies are making it very easy and very inexpensive to run your DNA, and you could get a sale on this for around $100 because they are creating an incredible data bank that they are able to sell to medicine. Medicines can target certain communities, etc. So you have to look at their privacy statements as you do this. If they give you the option of opting out of their thing, opt out. Because you don't want that is intellectual property that falls under that category. And it's not so much that it will harm you, but you are not being paid for your work. So those are my argument on both sides of this.
Are there any other questions for the senator in regards to? Oh, I have something I want to. What about?
Wait. The other battle that's some people are saying lineage, and then there's a group that's calling it harm-based. If you have been harmed by this system, not simply in slavery, if you've been harmed in American apartheid, the Jim Crow era, if you've been harmed recently, then you should be eligible. These are the two schools of thought around the issue of reparations. I'm sorry, Ms. Carney.
All right. I have another question, or I think this is a comment. Dr. Allen said that he traced his ancestors back name back to 1870 census. But before that, all I have is a listing on a 1960 slave schedule, which has an individual who possibly matches. Hopefully that would have been enough to justify my eligibility.
If I could just elaborate on that. We did a presentation on genealogy, Black genealogy, a couple of years ago for Black History Month. And we talked about how the different ways you can trace your lineage back, but we talked about I guess it's called a wall. You could trace your ancestors by name, but before 1870, you had slavery, and people were not listed by name. They're listed as a person on a slave schedule. And so I was able to identify a person who, by location and by age, and a Black male who's a slave of a Carswell family, is most likely my great-great-grandfather. So I was just really not a question there, just to illustrate what we have to deal with as we try to trace our ancestry. Is that and your suggestion about using genealogy DNA is a good one too, as a way to get past that wall, so to speak.
Well, you've done well, sir, and you are right that until the census of 1870, there will be difficulties in using the census because we were not people. We were considered things like cows, or how many homes you have, or we were property. So the wisest thing to do when you're doing federal is to use the 1870 census. But even the 1870 census, they were starting to get used to us. Even that has problems. You in federal, it'd be wiser just to use the 1880 census and start from there, because 10-to-1, those people were here during the time of slavery. Most how do you say these things? Most immigrant Blacks came during 2 or 3 different periods, and two or three different areas. If you're talking about Caribbean, the majority of the Caribbean came to America after 2 different periods. One, 1965, where thanks to your efforts, the civil rights movement opened the door to the Caribbean population to come here. They were not allowed in real numbers. Trickle was allowed, but they were not allowed to come. The civil rights struggle overturned that. We fought against the decline, the not allowing the Caribbean folk to come here, and Africa, and what I call continental Africans, Africans who were born and raised on the continent. We are African Americans. We are Africans in the diaspora. We are African Americans, and they are continental African. Both are Africans. We just have an American experience while they have a continental experience. But the Caribbean came in 2 different parts. 1965, which was when we overturned our struggles, opened the door to them. They would not be here without you. Your struggles opened the door for them to come. But the majority of the Caribbean population, at least in New York, and probably in the nation, has come to America after 2000. After the year 2000, the majority have come after that period. Fascinating. And that's true in New York, and I would argue it's probably true all over. We have more Caribbean folk than just about anybody else in the nation. Okay, I can go on. Thank you for stopping me, Sister Carney.
Mr. Carney, I have Senator Sanders, thank you very much. Very informative. You mentioned local, federal, you went earlier in your comments, which I appreciated. And I'm going to put it in the chat. It's just one of the articles about Evanston, Illinois, where the citizens there, through their local town halls and what they have now is like a $25,000 grant for home improvement mortgages for Black residents of Evanston who were affected by all the things that you mentioned that were happening to prevent, Blacks from achieving home ownership or good loans, because they were giving them different types of mortgage loans to purchase homes. And so that's an example of the local level reparations. Also that, it's people are questioning, is that enough? And they say the article says it's a noble start, and just how complicated. So I'll put a link to the NBC News article, but if you Google it, it's several different things. And it's really a good example of how a local community can come together to achieve it. So thank you for that reference to local.
Yours is an excellent point. Also, Evanston, Illinois is at the top of the food chain there. But Asheville, North Carolina is also exploring this. Several cities are exploring. So local, when people find that they have done wrong, you should not wait for some giant federal or whatever. You should undertake doing right where you are. If you live local, they say think globally, but act locally. And we should do it in where we are.
I just had one question for myself. The church getting involved with reparations, would there be conflict between separation of church and state? What would your response be to that?
The church is involved. You're already doing nothing means to side with an oppressor. Doing nothing, the church is already involved. Now, the way the church can advocate, there's a wall between church and state, but it's not a Chinese giant wall that stops you from ever doing or knowing what's on the other side. the church is able to advocate left, right, and center as it does. The church advocates already. The church, when there's a land deal, the church will advocate with government. If there's a property tax issue, the church will advocate for all kinds of things. The church always has a role with government. And this is as true with the Third Street as it is true with any church anywhere. So under those conditions, the church has an obligation to speak out against any injustice that it finds, and to speak to folk and say, hey, this is wrong, and we're coming out. And more churches are. And some churches have the United Church of Christ is one of the leading churches on social activism, etc. But this time, the Church of God should not be last. When it was in the civil rights struggle, we were among the last groups to get in. Now, may I remind you that Martin Luther King the Reverend Doctor, was not widely loved, even in the Baptist church. His activism led to a split in the Baptist church and created the National Progressive Baptists versus the other Baptists. The Progressive Baptists were the ones who went with Martin Luther King. The other Baptists did not. So under those conditions, the church always has a role, whether it wants it or not. You cannot be in this world and say, on this issue, we're not of this world. It's in a question of oppression. The church is not allowed to not free the slaves. The church is not allowed not to follow the Bible. The church, we draw out inspiration from what Jesus the Christ did. In the book of Luke, 4th chapter, when Jesus has been baptized, he clearly says what he wants us to do. And among it is to free the slaves.
All right. And Dr. Alan Coswell made a comment. He said universities are also exploring reparations, assessing how they benefited from slavery and how they can make it right.
Georgetown is chief among them. Georgetown saw that they basically were help. There was a period where Georgetown University was going down the drain. They didn't have money, so they sold around 40 slaves off and they were able to get the money to do some things with Georgetown. They have tracked down many of these people and have done right. Incidentally, that has led to an effort called 10 million voices, 10 million voices. There's an effort afoot, Dr. Carswell, in 10 million voices, that they are going to trace the genealogy of all Black Americans. And that started from Georgetown. The technology that they pioneered then, that they are using when they track down the descendants of those 40 slaves, they said, wait a minute, we could use this with all Blacks. And it's 10 million voices headed by a Black woman, mind you, and a white man, the white Georgetown graduate multimillionaire. He is one of the white people have a great role, and many of them have played an amazing role in doing things right. And we should say that also. So with these things being said, look up 10 million voices also. I think that if you have a genealogy in mind, me and my sister Naomi looked at it recently and quickly tracked down our great grandmother. And we just spent half an hour in it. They have done some amazing things.
All right, that's 10 million voices. Well, a lot of people are signing off because they have to go to church, but I have several people here that you should know. That thank you, Naomi Julia. Thank you, 3rd Street. I have several people here. Thank you, 3rd Street and Senator Sanders. Max Finberg says, thank you very much, Senator Sanders. This was terrific. May God continue to guide your next steps on this important issue. Thank you, Sister Connie, for making this happen. Sister Coretta, she is our Sunday school teacher. She said, thank you, Dr. Carswell. And she said, here is an article about Georgetown. She put in the link in regards to that. Thank you, Senator Sanders, Sunday School Superintendent Charlena Carney, and Dr. Carswell for this excellent presentation and discussion. I also have Sister Coretta said she had to leave because she's going to church. Deborah Hardy said, thank you, Sister Carney and Senator Sanders, Dr. Carswell, for an important presentation. Naomi Marcus Snipes says, great session, very informative, and thank you, Dr. Carswell. Thank you so much, Senator Sanders. Well, it looks like we are at the end of our presentation, and we would like to thank you, Senator James Sanders Jr., for an informative presentation. I think that your presentation and the way that you presented it, even a child in elementary school would understand what you're saying. It's so clear and so crystal clear. But we would like to thank you so much for sharing this time with us, because we know that you probably, after this, you're going somewhere to sell your product, so to speak. And I'm not going to say just one place. I don't know how many places he's going to today, but he has several stops before he can rest. But I would like to really thank everyone for coming to this presentation, to this community gathering. And I'd like to turn this into the hands of Dr. Carswell.
I'd like to offer my thanks also to Senator Sanders and Sister Carney for this outstanding presentation on reparations. I am going to be making this recording available on our website and through our social media. So I encourage everybody, for those who haven't been able to, who had to leave early, you have a chance to go with this again. I think it's so much information. I mean, we could go on for another couple hours, but unfortunately, we have other commitments. But I just want to appreciate you, Senator Sanders. I want to wish you success on your efforts in New York, and may it be an example for the rest of the nation. Okay, if all minds are clear, we're going to close in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for our time together this morning. It's been inspirational, informational, and has brought a lot of information to our minds about reparations, an important issue, and how it ties into our biblical mission on earth. We ask your blessings upon us as we part ways, Lord. Bless our morning service as we go into the service in a few minutes, Lord, and let your spirit rest, rule, and abide. We ask your blessings on Senator Sanders, blessings on his efforts as he makes an example of how it's done in New York that can be followed by other states, other localities, other universities, and the nation as a whole. We will praise you for the blessings that we receive. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Bye-bye. Thank you again.